Hello everyone, and welcome to May More Madness! Oh wait, hang on, it's August. Oops! Also, I tricked you! This is actually part 2 of my video on Colossal Biosciences! Yay! I had originally planned on making a video at the end of May about the void in the ecosystem that Moa left behind after their extinction, but if I'm being honest, I kinda got depressed writing it. Anyway, then life became hectic as heck, and I had basically no ability to work on videos for about a month, which sucks because I was hoping to do a bunch of videos about walking with dinosaurs, and they are still going to be coming really soon. But then something happened which just derailed my plans for videos, and we need to talk about it. Now, as we all know, I am a huge fangirl of Colossal Biosciences. I love them so much that I made a 35-minute long debunk video, which is actually only part 1 of what looks to be a much longer video, but the situation keeps changing. But anyway, in part 1, I demonstrated the company's pathological dishonesty, their incoherent and oftentimes inconsistent usage of the IUCN de-extinction criteria, some of the outright fascists involved in the company, the CEO and their social media teams, cruel mocking of scientists who disagreed with them, as well as frankly anyone who disagreed with them, the fact that anti-conservation extremist or really a skipwith is on their advisory board, the fact that their research is being used to downplay conservation goals by politicians, the fact that their CEO is an open fanboy of neo-Nazi fascist destroyer of science, Elon Musk, the fact that they keep using AI art in their promo material and making fun of people who criticize them for using AI art in their promo material, despite claiming to be an environmentalist company, and let's be honest, a whole host of other problems. Well, these guys, let's be honest, almost certainly scammers, decided right after they claimed to bring back direwolves, even though no scientist I'm aware of agrees that these animals were direwolves, that they would announce their next big project, which is that they want to bring back the iconic, giant, extinct flightless birds of New Zealand, the moa. Now, for tens of millions of years, moa were the only large browsers and grazers in Aotearoa, New Zealand. If you want to learn about them, check out my earlier videos in the May Moa Madness series. And this announcement was, frankly, shocking. And not just because they did it with AI art, despite being a multi-billion-dollar company run by a billionaire who could easily hire a paleo artist with pocket change to him to accurately represent the animal. And it's also not shocking because they somehow managed to get Peter Jackson involved? What are you doing here, Peter? You're better than this! No, this announcement was shocking because, well, no one has ever cloned a bird before, due to the extreme complexities of simulating an egg or getting a developing embryo into an egg. I was talking to my good friend Bethany about this shortly after the announcement, and she said that she had talked to a geneticist friend who had told her that if they can do that, then they can cure cancer, because it would be a feat on a similar level. As Revive and Restore, which is a non-profit foundation trying to do the same thing that Colossal is and bring back extinct species and use genetics for conservation, put it, we do not know how the majority of gene pathways in birds work on a cellular level, and the absence of a uterus in birds is also a huge problem, because when you remove a nucleus from an egg cell, by which I mean an egg as in an egg and sperm egg, not a bird's egg, because like around the egg cell in the center there'll be lots of other cells in an egg, but anyway, when you remove the nucleus from an egg cell, that cell is dead. And when you add a new nucleus in, that cell is still fundamentally dead. It requires electricity to stimulate it to divide and act like a living cell. And it needs this for many cell generations, up to the point that you have hundreds or thousands of cells within the embryo. And then you hit the problem that in birds, unlike in mammals, there's no uterus. So you can't just implant that embryo into a uterus as you would with a mammal. Instead, birds have what's called an oviduct, and the mother bird basically sends the embryo sliding down the oviduct as fluids, tissues, and eventually an eggshell form around it. So, to implant a cloned embryo into an egg, you would need to take a developing embryo out from a partially formed egg before the egg hardens, add your new embryo into it, hope that your new embryo integrates into the yolk, and then hope that all of these steps haven't deformed the egg, and then reinsert your partially formed egg into the mother and hope that all of these steps haven't injured or killed the mother bird. I think you can probably tell how this is so complicated and so much of a problem. But there are even more issues too. Namely that, once again, are they actually going to bring the moas back, or will this be another proxy which, if the direwolf proxies are anything to go by, probably won't even meet the IUCN criteria for recognition as a species proxy? Now, according to the Rolling Stone article, which the announcement was made on, scientists at Colossal are working with already developed a reference genome for the tinamous, which are the closest living relatives of moa based on all recent genetic analyses. But there's a huge problem here, namely that reconstructing a moa's genome and replacing differences in a tinamous would be an immense amount of work, since, as we discussed in our video on the origins of moa, the most recent common ancestor between moas and tinamous probably lived up to around 60 million years ago. And as a result, there are significant morphological differences that would have required significant genetic change over time, which means that there would need to be thousands of edits, if not more. The sheer size of the challenge that Colossal are trying to resolve here is so huge that it's really hard to justify their claims that they will bring moa back within the decade. Especially since in their direwolves, they only made around 20 edits. And Colossal have claimed that those direwolves are the end product as far as that species/project is confirmed. So this is made even more concerning by the fact that Colossal have stated that they're using the emu as well as tinamous as a species to be investigated, despite the fact that emu are even more distantly related than tinamous, and their strong similarities with moa are the result of convergent evolution, which means that they might just edit the genome of an emu to make an emu, which is not a close relative of a moa, look more like a moa, and say, well, we tried with tinamous, but it was easier to get these traits if we edited them on this less closely related animal. But there are even more issues that we need to talk about. The scientific community across Aotearoa, New Zealand, were consulted by Science Media Centre for their thoughts on the moa de-extinction announcement, and literally none of them supported this. Now, quite a few scientists are in this article, and I recommend giving it a read, but I'm going to focus on one scientist in particular who had by far the most to say, and that scientist is Nick Rawlins, who is an associate professor of paleogenetics at the University of Otago, and he said that he was, and I quote, shocked by the announcement, given that his research group had been working with tangata whenua, iwi, hapu, runanga and truss around the motu for around 10 years, and that according to him, based on all these conversations, there is very little support among these indigenous groups for the de-extinction of New Zealand species for many reasons. To paraphrase, First, he argues that there is no habitat left for moa due to the enormous amount of modification that humans have done to it, and how much we have fragmented it. He also argues that if we want to bring them back, we need enough individuals for them not to be horribly inbred, and argues that we would have to have at least 500 individuals. And he made a number of comments about tangata whenua around the country having not been involved in these discussions, with Colossal working on samples and DNA offshore using overseas scientists, effectively making this an effort in colonialism. This could be even worse when it comes to copyright law, since who would own the intellectual property rights of the genome of these new birds? The fact that the leading expert on moa genetics described himself as shocked by the announcement also really sets a notable precedent whereby American scientists at Colossal have not been engaging with scientists here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, who are already doing research potentially valuable even to their project. I hate to say it, but this almost feels like parachute science. Nick Rawlins has also written a great article on the Radio New Zealand website where he further elaborates on his criticisms. Namely, he points out that even among the paleognaths, there are no living analogues to the moa that have even close to similar lifestyles or similar habitats. So we really don't know how the moa that Colossal plan to produce would function, and if they would function like the true moa in their ecosystem. He also points out that since moa eventually lost their entire wing, then any effort to bring them back would involve targeting the regions of the genome that control the expression of the moa's wings. All other flightless birds still have wing remnants, so this is not going to be a quick cut and paste job. This is going to be a lot of genes that need editing for this specific trait alone, and as Nick notes, this could come with a lot of unintended consequences. Now, Nick makes a lot of great points in his article, which talks about the lack of involvement of iwi and hapu in the project beyond apparently a few cherry-picked groups, and the colonial implications of recreating a species important to a group of indigenous people, while the overwhelming majority of those people don't think that's a good idea. But I actually do have to disagree with Nick on his comments about there being no suitable moa habitat. There are actually large areas of mature indigenous forest in places like Fiordland, which could, I think, support moa, as well as fairly large patches of forest in Southland held under Department of Conservation covenants. We know that many of these Department of Conservation Covenant forests can support large animals because they support large populations of invasive red and fallow deer. The problems are that A, deer in these areas have already radically altered the species structure and they would compete with moa to food, and B, pigs, cats, possums and rats are a massive threat to moa chicks and can be present in very high numbers sometimes, even in remote, otherwise pristine native forest and alpine areas. As we discussed in our last May Moa Madness video, predatory introduced cats and pigs were very likely the nail in the coffin of the crested moa. Unless these pest animals, which would predate young moa and their eggs, can be reduced in number massively, I don't think there are very many places, even that look ideal to me as an ecologist, where a moa could be able to survive beyond a few fenced off sanctuaries and offshore predator-free islands. And C, Department of Conservation covenants which could provide great habitat for moa, provided we do sufficient predator and deer control. Even when they are very large, these covenants are surrounded by farmland and fenced off, which would prevent moa from being able to spread into their former range. and I doubt farmers would be all too pleased with flocks of giant flightless birds eating their crops and rampaging through their land. I can only realistically see this resulting in Moa being shot. If we truly can bring Moa back, and I think I made it very clear in my first Colossal Biosciences video when we were having the conversation with Harrison Duran, Astrid Lundberg and Warren Briggs, I actually do genuinely, wholeheartedly, deeply hope that we can truly bring these birds back in the future. I think there would need to be a huge concerted effort into invasive species control. And the problem is that given the apparent shock of the New Zealand scientific community at this announcement, see the prior articles, the researchers here who should be leading that work, as they have the greatest amount of experience and expertise in these ecosystems, just haven't been consulted prior to this de-extinction announcement. If Colossal aren't engaging properly with New Zealand scientists, then I do not see this project working in the long term, even if they somehow were to create moa that were within the genetic variability of a real moa population. And now we need to talk about one final problem regarding this situation. That being that, as Matthew Sparks reported recently in New Scientist, many of the scientists who have come out to criticize Colossal for their frankly misleading and false claims, for their working with fascists, the way their work is being used by right-wing politicians to undermine conservation efforts, etc., 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 many of these scientists have suddenly been hit by articles that smear their characters. For example, after paleontologist Dr. Tori Herridge of the University of Sheffield commented on Colossal's claims about mammoth de-extinction in a Guardian article about Colossal's woolly mice last year, a Business Mole article came out which said, and I quote, "Tori Herridge has become a controversial figure in modern science discourse, with many arguing that her lack of qualifications in crucial fields renders her critiques both uninformed and harmful." Despite the fact that she is a very qualified person with undeniable experience in the area whose critiques were completely valid. Dr. Vincent Lynch, a developmental biologist at the University of Buffalo, who is a vocal critic of Colossal on Twitter, said that he suddenly received a number of blog posts claiming that aspects of his research were unsuccessful and undermining his credibility in the de-extinction debate. Nick Rowlands also experienced 2 articles that he called hit pieces about him, which accused him of only criticizing Colossal to stay in the spotlight and of being intellectually inconsistent. Now, Colossal have denied intentionally starting smear campaigns against their high-profile critics, but given that we already know that they are a pathologically dishonest company, as evidenced and outlined in our last video, as well as all the issues with George Church, which you might have seen in the Behind the Bastards video, I struggle to believe this completely. Again, if we actually can bring back moa and preserve their environment, I personally am all for it, but I don't think that can be done by disregarding Maori voices or stepping over the scientific community in Aotearoa, New Zealand, because Colossal think they know better. And I do not believe that this research should be done by Colossal Biosciences. I am personally very glad to see that the scientific community as a whole have overwhelmingly rejected this company, and in part 3 of the Colossal Biosciences video, we're going to talk about even more of this stuff. Huge shout out goes to my wonderful patrons, especially my amazing 4am tier supporters, Aries, Geneva and Tiles, as well as our wonderful Dilophosaurus tier supporters, Futurebird and Ours, and our Regularian tier supporters, Glenn Collins, Rowie Arting, and Jean and Eric Feenstra. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. My next video will include a maid outfit for reasons.